Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video. So recently I did a tank tour video for Reefs.com, and I wanted to replay that video on my channel since it gives a really good summary of how I like to run a reef tank and the equipment I use. So without further ado, let's roll the tape. Alright, so in terms of my background, I've been keeping reef tanks for at least 25 years, maybe it's closer to 30, I have to double check that. In terms of the aquarium, it's a coast-to-coast custom aquariums tank. It measures 60 inches long by 30 inches wide by 24 inches tall. I really do like wide tanks because it just gives you more options for aquascaping. The tank's got Starfire on 3 sides, Euro bracing, and an external overflow box. So this tank has been running since April 2017, and as you can see, it is SPS dominant. I did reboot the tank. I started it with dry rock and I had just one problem after another, so I restarted it with Haitian live rock and live sand, and I really like the instant biodiversity you get with the live rock, even though it is pretty hard to come by these days. So, you know, as I mentioned, this tank is SPS dominant. I just dig the sticks. And as you can see also, the tank has really grown in rather nicely, so I definitely need to prune it, and I need to prune it a lot because it's, you know, once the corals grow in like this, it limits circulation, and that will eventually cause the SPS to die. I also do keep some LPS, as you can see. I have a lot of Alveopora and Gonipora, which is interesting because years and years ago, those are very, very tough corals to keep. But nowadays they're aquacultured and they're much easier to keep. So I love how they flow in the current. And actually, people that come and check out my tank are really drawn to those corals versus the SPS corals because they're moving. But you know, hey, to each their own. In terms of my reef keeping philosophies, I really like to keep it simple. I also think it's important to keep the hands out of the tank. I don't like to mess with things. I don't like to move things around. I just let Mother Nature do her thing, let things kind of evolve organically in the tank. I also think it's really, really important to practice patience. Nothing good happens in this hobby when you rush things, so patience is really a virtue. Another thing that's really important, I believe, are to have stable parameters, especially alkalinity. I do test my parameters on a regular basis. I have a KH director from GHL, so I have, you know, I'm monitoring the alkalinity, and I'm also controlling it with that device. I also use test kits to measure the calcium. And you know, and in terms of alkalinity, I do like to keep it between 8 and 9 DKH, and the KH director really does just kind of lock it in, which is awesome. So I have mine set to 8.5, and it's pretty much right at that level, which is great. So for calcium, I like to keep it in the 420 to 440 part per million range. For magnesium, you know, pretty much in the 1400 to 1440 part per million range. Nitrates around 5 to 10, and phosphates, you know, anywhere between 0.03 up to even you know, 0.1. So, but what I also think is important is not to try to chase numbers and get so caught up and wrapped up in what your test results are revealing. So I do think it's important to test, but I'm not going to obsess over the results of my test kits. So, and you know, another thing that I do on a regular basis is water changes. I do about 10% every week. I will also sometimes dose nitrate and phosphate if necessary, but I really don't use too many supplements or coral food with my tank. I do currently feed reefroids with my fish food, so, but I have also used Oyster Feast and Rhodey Feast from Reef Nutrition, although I haven't really done that with this tank. In terms of equipment, let's start with lighting. I am an old school metal halide guy. I'm still using those bulbs, and I use 400 watt 20K radiums, and I've had great success with those bulbs. They grow corals really fast and they color up corals, so I've stuck with them. But obviously I think the you know, LEDs are a great option, and a lot of fantastic SPS dominant tanks are lit by LEDs. So you know, I know that halides are great for me, it works for me, but LEDs are also a very intriguing option for me down the road. In terms of calcium and alkalinity supplementation, currently, I'm using an ESV 2-part and I'm using a GHL doser 2.1 for that. I have used calcium reactors in the past with great success, so either method I've had great luck with. Flow, I think, is really important for a reef tank, so I have 2 MP40s from Ecotech. In terms of nutrient export, I'm currently using a Refugium lit by a Kessel 8 H380 grow light, but I have used and had great success with algae reactors in the past from Pack's Bellum. So I used to use actually GFO, and there were some definite downsides with the GFO, and I just really wanted to go with the more natural means in terms of using macro for nutrient export. The problem with GFO is that it could shock corals and cause them to fade if there was, used too aggressively. And I also didn't like the fact that you could strip out valuable trace elements with GFO. So that's why I have, the last several years, used macro. In terms of other equipment, I use the GHL Profilux 4 controller, and I mentioned the doser that I use for the 2-part and the KH Director. The sump is a Royal Exclusiv Dream Box. I have a skimmer, and I also use carbon to keep the water clean. But really overall, when it comes to equipment and technology, I try not to have too many moving parts. I think technology is a great thing, but I really try not to lean on it, rely on it that heavily. Another thing that's important to me is to observe my tank on a daily basis. I think that sometimes I can see potential trouble by just looking at my corals before a test result reveals a problem. So daily observation for me is something that is certainly very important. I also have 2 frag tanks that are plumbed into the system. One is a 75-gallon tank that I use to grow out colonies, and the other is a 50-gallon aquarium that I use for frags. And both of those tanks are lit by metal halides. Well, that'll do it for this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. I also want to remind you about my premium SPS frag store on ReefBum.com. I will leave a link in the video description below. I will also leave links from my equipment store. I do sell GHL, Royal Exclusiv, and Pack's Bellum equipment. Many of these products I do use personally on my tanks. And lastly, if you are interested, I do offer an online reef keeping master class which focuses on SPS dominant reefs. Hey, I really appreciate the view. Until next time, be safe and be well. Adios.